Hey, I'm Creed. So right now, the forms we're going to take a look at are when you decide to hire a broker. Here in Colorado, it's good advice for maybe a lot of parts of the country, but specific to Colorado. You've spent way too much time hanging out on Realtor.com and Zillow and maybe RE Colorado, the local MLS front end site, and you're ready to get kind of serious about this home search and home purchase idea. These are the forms you would likely be seeing at that point, hopefully in about the same order as you're about to see them. And I'm going to go into some detail on each one of them, but not so much detail that you want to hang yourself and turn off the video. I want you to learn because this is really important stuff, and you're committing yourself to a specific broker, and you're committing to ensure that broker gets paid, and you are the person officially paying them. You need to look at these forms to understand that fully. This is not legal advice. This is not tax advice. This is not accounting advice. This is just a longtime broker giving you some good information and hopefully helping you improve that whole process of seeking out and purchasing a home. So who creates these forms you're about to commit your life away on? The Colorado Real Estate Commission, which is part of the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies. You won't need to remember that. But what you do want to look for is at the very top of each contract, you should see a statement somewhat like this. And it says very specifically, Colorado Real Estate Commission has approved this document. If you don't see that, one of a few scenarios may be happening. One is the broker you're trying to hire has paid an attorney to create their own documents, or maybe you're in front of a home builder representative. They have their own documents, and maybe it's for sale by owner, and they have scraped up some kind of documents here on the internet. So be careful. Look for that statement, and you want to know that the contracts and disclosures and addendums are approved by the Colorado Real Estate Commission, and that's a good start for you right there. That protects you. That's their job. Their job is not to protect brokers. It's to protect you, the consumer, the home buyer, okay? And what we're going to talk about right this moment, definitions of working relationships. And what does that mean? This is my broker. This is my real estate broker. Well, we want to make sure you understand how those brokers can represent different people at different times. And this gets really complicated. We're going to start off where it's simple, and we're just going to give you the definitions. And later on, we're going to talk about how it gets really complicated, and you could actually lose your right to that representation that you've had and you signed up for as negotiations get underway, and that becomes really important to you. So we're going to talk about, this mentions that this could be a home buyer and seller, or it could be a landlord and tenant situation. We're going to talk about home buyer and home seller. Every licensed real estate broker / agent, same thing, in the state of Colorado is required to give you this form. And it's not a contract. Let's look down here. This is not a contract. So if you sign this, it's not committing you to anything. But every broker is required by the Colorado Real Estate Commission, Department of Regulatory Agencies, who looks out for you to make sure you understand these terms. And this should be the first thing you actually see when you start getting halfway serious in any discussion with a real estate broker. If it's one thing you're chit-chatting about, boy, I'd sure like to get a bigger house or a new house or a house, and I'm thinking about looking around this neighborhood, that's okay. That's fine. But when you say, I'm thinking about buying in this neighborhood, I've been pre-qualified for X amount per month, I need 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and an 11-car garage, all of a sudden, the broker should be guiding you toward this. And that's their job. If you sign this, all you're doing is acknowledging that that broker did their job in case the Colorado Real Estate Commission comes to investigate anything. But if you don't sign this, all they're going to do is they're going to write on here, presented to buyer this day, this time, and they refuse to sign. Does that make sense? At first you're thinking, I don't care about seller's agent. I don't even own a home yet, but you do. Let's just get these definitions down. It's important. Seller's agent, okay? And by the way, agent, I wish they would, that's a legal term, okay? As an agency. In Colorado, everybody with a real estate license is a real estate broker. We're going to use the term agent and broker interchangeably, not to be confused with the company they work with, which is the brokerage. And just leave it at that for right now. Seller's agent or broker works solely on behalf of the seller to promote their interests of the seller with utmost good faith, loyalty, fidelity, negotiates on behalf and acts as an advocate for the seller. Okay, fine. You're thinking that's cool. I didn't like that guy anyway, and he works for the seller, and I just want to buy a house. Well, what's a buyer's agent? It's pretty much the exact same thing, but the opposite side of the coin, right? Agent negotiates on behalf and acts as an advocate for the buyer. Cool. Well, that's what you want, right? Where it gets complicated, and we won't touch it till later on in the video, is when the agent or the team or the brokerage is representing both the seller and the buyer, and it gets a bit more complicated real quick. What's a transaction broker then? Okay, there's no written agreement required. You can sign one, but it's not required. And what does that mean? Well, let's take a look if the transaction broker was working as your broker, okay? They can assist the buyer and or seller or both at the same time on the same deal. See how that starts to get a little uncomfortable? Performing any terms of any written or oral agreement. Be careful on that oral stuff. We'll talk about that later. Everything in real estate should be in writing. And that is the stuff that's legally binding. Oral gets pretty iffy. You want it for sure, it's in writing, okay? Fully informing the parties, presenting offers, assisting parties with contracts and closing and transaction without being an agent or advocate for any of the parties. What does that mean? So as a buyer, you've hired an agent. We're going to get to that next. That's a different contract. You've hired an agent to represent you, and it's their job to do anything and everything they can to get you what you most want out of this deal, as long as they're not doing anything illegal or immoral, okay? And that's what it comes down to. They're your advocate. They're your advisor. They're there to do anything they can to get you what you want. Transaction broker, and this is not a formal definition at all, but this was presented by an attorney in a class some times back. So a seller's agent is representing the seller. The buyer's agent is wholly representing the buyer. The transaction broker is representing the transaction. They're going to do anything they can to keep the deal together and to work out, but they can't represent either party. So you can't say to them something, that you don't necessarily want the seller to know outright, because they're no longer representing you. Now, they can't disclose it to the seller, but they can't go in and negotiate on your behalf for that point you most want. I know it's a little confusing. Stick with that basic stuff. Seller broker represents seller, buyer broker represents buyer. Transaction broker is there to make the transaction work. Each party, buyer and seller, is giving this broker knowledge of what they want, but they're not negotiating on your behalf. They're not in there digging for every little thing that you most desire. And you don't want to tell them any longer what you most desire. Does that kind of make sense? The last thing that we're going to talk about on this form is customer. Well, what's a customer? Man, it's getting confusing already, right? So let's say that there's a broker that has a signed seller's agreement represent the seller, and they have that home on the market, and you, at this point, have still been in that search mode, hanging out on Realtor.com and Zillow, and you're driving along, and you see that this agent's got this agent broker, right? Use them both simultaneously for the same meaning. Has got this open house going on, and you pop in, and this is the house. This is the house of your dream, okay? They represent the seller, and they've signed that in writing. So what that means is if you're interested in having that broker write up an offer and present it to that seller, you are a customer, which means they owe you nothing other than to not lie, cheat, or steal. Does that make sense? It's just like you're going into Walmart and you're buying, I don't know, whatever you buy at Walmart, bed sheets, okay? That clerk is going to point you in the direction and hand them to you or whatever it is and ring them up. But they're not going to advise you, oh, by the way, this is, not officially the 400 thread Egyptian cotton. This was made in Detroit. And they're shearing dogs to create the cloth. Does that sort of make sense? You are just a part of this transaction, and you officially have no representation as a customer. They can't do anything illegal to you. They can't lie, cheat, or steal, but you have nobody looking out for you but you. Make sense? Very quickly, let's touch on that scenario. You're driving along. You do not have a broker representing you. You come up on an open house. You go in. You love the house, right? We already know that the broker has a written agreement with the seller to represent them solely, and you have no representation at this point. The agent, the broker, is going to break out a slightly different form. It's going to look a lot like this. This is why we're covering the basics. And let's pop that open right now. This is a more specific broker disclosure that they should pull out and say, you know what, you're starting to talk. It's one thing if you say, boy, it's a great house, love the neighborhood, see you later. Don't worry about it then. But if you start saying, man, we really like this house, we might consider making an offer. They should be pulling out this form. Now, if you look at the top half, it's very similar to our disclosure, but this is more specific for a scenario just like we're discussing. That's why we cover the basics, so you know what's going on at each one of these steps. This is going to talk about the 4 ways broker could or could not represent you. And then it's going to be very specific, and it's going to say this broker, okay, has not entered into any kind of relationship with you. They're here holding this house open on behalf of a seller they do have, and they can put the actual address in there, that they do fully represent. And then down here, they may check one of these, okay? And again, this is not a contract. It's still a disclosure. It's not locking you into anything, but it's you're acknowledging that if you were to proceed with an offer on this home, you have no representation at this point, or at any point, really. The customer, that would be you. You're a customer, and the broker is a seller's agent or a seller's transaction broker. Broker is not the agent or transaction broker of buyer. So what does that mean? You're a customer, remember? Customer for brokers' listings, transaction broker for other properties. Oh, it's already starting to get complicated. I promised you I could do that, and this isn't even the worst stuff. So if you bought that home, this broker has open, where he's got a written agreement representing the seller, okay? You are a customer. You have no representation yet. If you want to go look at some other homes, you would be defaulting over to a transaction broker. What's a transaction broker? Remember, they don't fully represent you. You're there to kind of say, you know what, tell me about this, or can we do this, or would you put this into writing and present it for us? They're not going to go in and be your full advocate. Okay, they don't fully represent you. They represent what? Kind of the transaction on your behalf. Makes sense a little bit? So on this third one, transaction broker only, we're getting really complex already. So let me just go ahead and let's do some of this stuff. We'll cover it again when we eventually get to making offers and what can happen and so on and so forth much further down the line. But for right now, transaction broker only for this particular deal. There's only one of two ways this could happen. One, their agreement with the seller is not seller representation, but it was already just a transaction broker, right? So the home seller said, you know what, we don't care if you don't fully represent us as a seller. We just want you to sell the home. You can be a transaction broker, which means what? They're there to make a deal work out somehow, okay? And they're going to do everything they can to make the deal work out, but they don't represent that seller. In that case, you now could be, quote, represented, right? Even though you don't have representation, as that transaction broker on this deal by this broker. And then they're going to pull out some additional paperwork. It's not over there, okay? The only other way this would work out is if that seller, okay, did have representation and that broker was a seller's agent, then that agent, that broker, would have to go back to the seller and get them to abdicate, to release them from seller representation, to then adjust down to a transaction broker, and then they could try to pull this whole thing off. See, I told you it got ugly and complicated, and it can get worse than that. And I'm sorry if I confused you. Just let it go at that. You know what a seller's agent is. You know what a buyer's agent is. You know what a transaction agent is, right? They just there to work out the deal. And you know what a customer is, which means you have no representation. Okay, fair enough. And as we go through different scenarios, much further down the line in this video series, we'll bring up those points when we need to. I need you to calm down right now. We took you too far. So next, we're going to start talking about the, let me open it up for you. We're going to start talking about the exclusive right to buy listing contract, and that'll be in the next video.